What's up, everyone? Good morning and welcome to Shaw Locals Bears Insider Podcast. I am Kyle Nabors along with Sean Hammond here with you after taking a couple weeks off, getting reset. Sean, the season is fun and it was a much more entertaining season than you would expect for a 3-win team, but needed a couple weeks to kind of get reset and start getting our offseason plans in place here. What's been going on in your neck of the woods, man?
Yeah, well, it's been a lot of rewatching the film on what happened in 2022, and as painful as that might be in some areas, and um, sort of evaluating what the Bears really need and looking to see what's out there. I think we're just at the beginning of that process. Those of us who cover the team in the season, I know there's the folks who follow the draft all year long, but we're kind of just beginning that process here these last few weeks. The Senior Bowl has been on this week. It's been fun to pay attention to what's going on down there. And yeah, it's an exciting time of year, I think, for everybody across the league, and especially if you're the Bears with all these draft picks and obviously the number one pick.
Yeah, the Senior Bowl game taking place tomorrow. We are recording this on Friday morning, February 3rd. If you're watching this live, of course, you know what day it is. But yeah, the Senior Bowl taking place, I believe, at 1:30 Central Time on the NFL Network. We just dropped this morning 10 players to keep an eye on in terms of context for guys that could end up on the Bears' radar here in a couple months when we're looking at the NFL draft. Sean. But yeah, make sure you go to shawlocal.com to find that. You can follow Sean on Twitter at Sean_Hammond. You can follow myself on Twitter at Kyle Nabors. And again, all of our content at shawlocal.com. Sean, when you start looking through this roster, and that's what I kind of spent the last week trying to figure out where the Bears are at. My first instinct, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anyone, but if there are two positions that I feel strongly that the Bears need to address, whether that's through the draft, through free agency, or via trade, to improve most rapidly, to me, it's pass rusher and wide receiver.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you, particularly with the pass rusher. I mean, we know that this Bears team, 20 sacks last year, dead last. The Eagles had 70 to lead the league, so that's a heck of a difference between number one and number 32. They need to get to the quarterback more, and anybody who watched the Bears is not surprised in hearing that. There were so many times where you can't create any pressure up front, and that obviously puts strain on your secondary, on your linebackers. Those cornerbacks gotta cover those wide receivers for that much longer when you can't get any pressure up there. And yeah, that's got to be an area where the Bears address. Honestly, I think they should do it both in free agency and in the draft. You can't get enough good guys at a position like that when you're essentially starting with almost nothing. I mean, they were the worst pass rush team in the league, and you might like some of the guys, and you might see potential in a Dominique Robinson, in a Travis Gibson, who did have 7 sacks a year ago, but they just didn't get it done this year. And so you got to bring in more guys at that spot. I feel like I know Ryan Poles said at the end of the year that just because he has all this cap space doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be a spending spree per se. But I think if there's one spot where the Bears are going to be okay paying top dollar for a guy, it's going to be at that pass rusher spot.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is an area that they're, with the incredible amount of money that they have going into this offseason. If there's one spot where they overpay, I do think pass rusher would be that spot. And that's not to say, I know we got people popping into the chat already. Gary checking in, saying, I need my fix getting through work. Happy to have us back. Yeah, it's good to be back with you.
Yeah, sorry about the break, guys. We needed a couple weeks there after the season.
Yeah, Gary said 3 tech and O-line. CJ Williams checking in with saying Olin Cruz, referring to Olin Cruz, would argue best teams are made through the lines. When we're talking about pass rush, when we're Matt Eberflus's defense, we are talking about the edge rushers, the defensive line at least. And It was funny. So Hub will be joining us here on the podcast throughout the spring. We're kind of in that ramp up process. If you guys didn't see Hub on the show a couple weeks ago, go back and watch that. It was great having him on. He will be back more regularly. Like I said, bit of a ramp up process. But I was messaging back and forth with him earlier this week, and we were talking about story ideas, and I wanted to get his input on Roquan Smith and the trade that went down while Hub was off of work, and it was and I started looking at it, and the Ravens ended up giving Roquan Smith that extension. I believe it was 5 years, $100 million. Um, you know, and you look at the fact like Jack Sanborn, before the injury, had really stepped into that role after the trade and had exceeded expectations. Nicholas Morrow, free agent signing, I thought played pretty well this year. You look at the secondary, the young guys back there. I thought, Kyler Gordon had some struggles, but overall, I thought was pretty good this year. I actually thought, the back part of the defense played pretty well, Sean. To me, it's just you look at it and it's this lack of pass rush. They are so far away up front on defense that it makes it a little more difficult to evaluate what else they actually need when it comes to the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, obviously, when you're the worst, you're the worst defense in the league, and by points per game, they were the worst defense in the league this year. I think they were 29th in yards per game. There's plenty of blame to go around, both up front and on the backside. But I agree with you. I mean, uh, I know Kyler Gordon had a slow start to the season, and sure, you can pick, you can watch any game and see some guys in that secondary making mistakes, but I do think they have some pieces back there that are promising and that you can build off of, and outside of when they were really banged up late in the year in December, I kind of throw that out. Eddie Jackson was gone, and
Yeah.
some guys were in and out, but when they had their full group healthy, I did think that secondary played really well and could have is a promising group to watch. And I agree that the lack of production up front on that defensive line really, it's kind of a domino effect with the entire defense, and it puts pressure on the guys behind them to do their jobs for longer. I thought that secondary was playing really well, especially like up until like when Kyler Gordon had his concussion in Atlanta. I thought those couple games there, late October, early November, I thought those guys were playing really well back there.
Yeah, I thought the secondary was really coming along. Gary, following up about my Roquan, said, "Let's move on from Roquan. It's over and done with." So like it's not about the trade, Gary. That's not what I'm saying. It's more about the fact that Roquan, while maybe he wasn't playing to the level where you felt comfortable that the Bears needed to pay him, like I don't really regret that trade. I don't think Bears fans should regret the trade. What I'm getting at though is like he was playing well. Like you noticed him in the defense. And then you notice Jack Sanborn when Jack Sanborn took over that role. I bring it up because what I'm trying to say is just because the Bears have a lot of money, like they still have to prioritize what they need this off season and where they want to invest. Because just throwing a ton of money at every position or kind of, trying to I guess what I'm trying to say is you shouldn't overspend. Like, I think this needs to be targeted, Sean, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I think it will be targeted, and especially if you look at what Ryan Poles has, you look at his the hand he's been dealt, or whatever you want to say. He's got the 9 draft picks. If you trade back in that number one spot, which there's a lot of talk about that being a possibility in the draft come draft day or before then. You might see this Bears team wind up with 11 or 12 selections in this draft, and yeah, you're talking about like bringing in a whole bunch of new guys, a bunch of rookies that some are going to have better resumes than others, and you're going to be excited about different levels. But I don't necessarily think that they need to go out and spend at every single position, or that's really what Ryan Poles is going to want to do. I know last year was kind of a weird year because they obviously weren't really trying to win, and that's a big reason why they didn't spend in his first free agency as a GM. But I don't think all that much changes. I do think that they'll look to add at a couple of key spots. I really think that defensive line is one of them. Um, you mentioned receiver earlier. I don't necessarily think they're going to address that in a big way in free agency, just because the market is a little weird this year as far as who's available in free agency. But they'll certainly bring somebody in. You could see them bring a smaller, uh, uh, on a smaller contract, not a smaller receiver, but a smaller contract type guy. But yeah, I mean, they are going to be really targeted about where they want to spend their money, because these things really affect year after year when you spend these big contracts. There's he's starting Ryan Poles is starting with a blank slate right now, and he has to be cautious so that he can set himself up well into these future years here.
Yeah, you don't want to. I'm trying to think of a good example of a team that we expect to be ascending that overspent early and maybe overextended itself and got itself into a position where it couldn't get out of. Um, Nothing coming to mind right offhand here. I have to think about that, but we're going to spend some time on wide receiver and on the offensive side of the ball. But before we switch over to that, CJ had followed it up with, CJ had followed it up here with Sanborn Ascension. Let me know that anyone could be decent at linebacker with good bodies in front of them. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I wouldn't say anyone, but I think what we saw was that Matt Eberflus's system is in good enough shape that maybe the Bears don't need to spend top dollar at the linebacker position, and that will allow them to focus on those lines and wide receiver, as we were saying. And Sean, you were, as you mentioned there, you're absolutely right when it comes to wide receiver and free agency. I think most lists that you've seen around has Juju Smith-Schuster as the top-rated wide receiver in this free agent class. And listen, like Juju Smith-Schuster is a fine player, but he is not the type of receiver that I think that you would want to be spending, a multi-year deal on, particularly for what the Bears need at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't necessarily see for what they have on their roster right now and what they think that Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool could be. I don't see a reason why you would spend a ton of money on any one particular receiver this offseason. Yes, certainly, we saw what happened with the receiver market last offseason. It went crazy, and you got all kinds of guys making money. Somebody is going to pay Juju Smith-Schuster a bunch of money and give him a multi-year deal. But I don't think that the Bears should necessarily be one of those teams that's looking to do that. Whether it's Juju Smith-Schuster, whether it's Jacoby Myers, Darius Slayton, DJ Chark, any of those guys, um, you're going to see Ryan Poles be a little bit cautious, because they really want Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool to be the top two options at this receiver spot. Maybe you bring in another guy through the draft and hope that he could ascend to that level. But I don't know that with the investment they already paid to bring in Chase Claypool, I don't know that they're going to necessarily spend a ton at that receiver spot.
That's I get what you're saying. That's concerning to me though, because we did not see enough from Chase Claypool to feel comfortable with the Bears, where the Bears are at. And this is really where we start getting into more of a gray area when it comes to Ryan Poles and not really knowing what the Bears front office is at this point, because you need to have there's reasons to have faith in Ryan Poles in the front office, but I think Hub put it pretty well a couple weeks ago. Like, he feels better. Hub talked about feeling better about this coaching staff than the front office currently after this first year, and I think I'm in the same boat, because we look at wide receiver and there aren't any of these big name guys, but I don't want them to be able to default to saying, well, we already brought in Chase Claypool. You did, and there were not good results out of that. And you look at the wide receivers, guys that he brought in, Ryan Poles brought in on 1-year contracts, Equinemius and St. Brown, who the Bears have already re-signed to a 1-year deal, but good blocker, but not a guy that's going to be catching the ball very much. Byron Pringle didn't work out. Dante Pettis didn't work out. They made the trade for N'Keal Harry. That didn't work out. I know these are guys that were flyers, but at this point, there isn't anything that points to me thinking Ryan Poles can figure out the wide receiver position. Again, it's only 1 year, and this wasn't a year. This was kind of a throwaway year, but when there's not an obvious answer going into this free agent class, I think that kind of complicates things for me a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it does complicate things. I just don't want to see them spend money in a way that they're gonna regret. I think they're much more likely to use a second, a third round draft pick on a receiver. I don't think they're just gonna stick with the guys they have and roll it back again. I don't think they can do that. I would just be surprised based on everything we've seen with Ryan Poles and the way he approached free agency last year. And I would be surprised if they spend big. Now, I do think they got to bring in somebody. They're going to have to replace the Byron Pringles and the N'Keal Harrys of the 2022 Bears with somebody. I just don't know if that's going to be a big time free agent.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna. I mean, they might have depth via free agency for at the wide
Mm-hmm.
receiver position, but you're right. I don't think it's there's not going to be any splash names. I don't think there's just not a reason to spend in the free agent market at the top of it at least.
Yeah, and I really do think I know some fans have gotten frustrated, but I really do think that they believe in Chase Claypool and want to see more and think that he can produce more than what he showed, in November and December with the Bears. I know that doesn't excite people, but I think you give him a full offseason with Justin Fields, and it's got to look a lot better than it did at the end of last year.
I mean, I've been a big Chase Claypool guy for years. I don't, and anyone who's listened to this podcast certainly knows that. I just don't think there was enough. You didn't see enough last year to feel comfortable, particularly and like they were really banged up at the end of the year. But like when Darnell Mooney went out and there was not a noticeable bump in the target share, the involvement of Chase Claypool, that's really concerning to me. But yeah, so we got Steve Snezik here checking in, said talk about the balance that Poles needs to strike between convincing Fields he's the guy and convincing the world that they're interested in a quarterback at number one in order to raise draft interest. And there's a lot to get into there,
Hmm.
Sean. And I think the first thing that I'll say is I don't think Ryan Poles needs to do that in order to raise interest in the number one pick.
I don't necessarily think he does either. I think it comes down to I mean, it comes down to whether these other how badly do these other teams want one of these quarterbacks? Regardless of what the Bears want or what regardless of what they think the Bears are going to do. You are sitting in a good position with Houston at number 2, who very clearly needs a quarterback. I don't know if they're going to ultimately draft one, but they could certainly use one. And that's going to put you in a good position for any team that's going to want a quarterback. The question is, how badly are these teams going to want a quarterback? Are they going to want to spend what it's going to take to jump Houston in that situation?
Yes, someone will because at the end of the day, we can, and this is what's funny. Like we can go through this time and time again. Um, but at the end of the day, teams we give way too much credit to front offices and ownership sometimes, and like the vast majority of teams are competent front offices and competent ownership. But there's always going to be a nice little rotating cast of just dumbasses. There's not really any other way I can put it. Like there's always going to be a couple teams that have decided this is a time that they need to make their move, right? This is a quarterback. There's going to be an owner that decides, listen, I can't have this team being this bad. I want us to go out and get that quarterback. And you look at it, there are 8 to 10 teams right now that legit need quarterbacks. There's just no chance in the world that there's not going to be any of them that are dumb enough to come up and make that trade. Even though I don't really think there's a quarterback that is a surefire guy that deserves to go at number one. Someone is going to convince themselves that they need to make that trade, though.
Yeah, you got a phone line for Jim Irsay. You got a phone line for Mark Davis. I mean, those two guys come to mind as soon as you say that, Kyle. I mean, they're the type of guys who are, in some ways, make these impulsive decisions, and you see the Colts have been so conservative with their quarterback spot and not wanting to take a chance, and obviously it seems like that's about to change from everything we've heard that's going on in Indianapolis, who, by the way, is still interviewing coaching candidates. I don't know how long that's going to drag on for, but um, it's been a weird situation there in Indy.
It absolutely has. I mean, Indy, who was the other team you said there? Was
The
it
Raiders.
I mean, yeah, the Raiders, Washington, Houston's obviously picking at number 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if they get worried that another team could come up at number 1. They've made it very obvious that they're very, very interested in finding their quarterback of the future after the weird disaster that was that season down there in Houston. Alan checking in here with Kyle. There always is a sucker at the poker table. That's exactly what I'm saying here. And really, when we start to look at it here, like, I'm starting to wonder, like, just how, I guess the thing here is the question I have here is, do we have a situation where the Bears could end up with 2 first-round picks this year? That's where I think is the most intriguing thing to me. I fully expect them to trade down out of that first spot. I'd be absolutely shocked if they picked at number 1 overall. The question is there a scenario where they end up with 2 first-round picks this year? And would that be worth it? But I think the Bears, when you look at free agency, the way things up, we talked about, there are not a lot of top tier free agent guys where I think the Bears should be spending a lot of this draft, or I'm sorry, not draft capital, a lot of this cap space. Like, I'd much rather see them be aggressive in the draft and try and find these potential high upside players that could have a pretty immediate impact than maybe overspend free agency, Sean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to follow up on what you were saying about teams with multiple ones. I mean, obviously Houston is like the perfect scenario because they're sitting there with number 2 and number 12. But that would be amazing
Well,
if you're the
so
Bears. But
I'm not saying that. Like,
yeah,
I mean, that would be incredible. Like, if someone was able to do that, I mean, if someone was dumb enough to, what I think is a more likely scenario though is like the Bears. Let's say like the Bears trade down to like number 7. I'm not
yeah.
even looking at a chart here, but what I see is a more likely scenario is like then the Bears trade back into like the later part of the first round, like maybe into the
Like
the
trade
mid
back
20s.
twice is what you're saying.
No. Like, I'm saying like maybe
Trade down and trade up.
yeah, like
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
like, yeah, you end up at number 7 and then you come back up to like number 23, number 24, because there is that wide receiver or offensive tackle or someone there that you think that has fallen a little bit.
That's certainly a possibility if you trade back to 7 and then let's say you wind up getting a higher second round pick. I mean, that's certainly ammunition if you want to jump back up there from that situation. Yeah, I mean, I would like to see them be aggressive and if Ryan Poles has conviction for some of these guys and wants to do that, I certainly think that's he wants to build through the draft, and certainly he's going to have guys that he likes. And the Bears have a really good. They're sitting in a really great situation. No matter what comes of that number 1 pick, no matter what kind of trade scenarios come about, they're going to have an opportunity to make this team a lot better through the draft.
Mike Johnson checking in. Mike, good to see you, man. So yeah, kind of following up what you were saying there, Sean, with might swap number 1 and 2 with Texan plus the number 12 this year for our first rounder next year. Something like that might be able to get it done, where you get that number 2 and number 12 pick if you give up the first rounder next year, Sean.
Okay, yeah, something like that. Other teams, the Lions also have 2 picks. The Jets, I believe, have 2 picks.
Seattle, Allen checking in here. Seattle has 2 first-round picks. Maybe they want to move on from Geno Smith. Seattle's a really intriguing team overall to me, Sean, because they are at a point where they performed better than I expected with Geno Smith, but like there's a lot of questions with the core of that group and where that team is headed. I don't know what they're going to do there. That certainly is something that I could see. I shouldn't say see happening. I don't know what Seattle's going to do, I guess. I really don't when I think
I don't know because yeah, I mean, Geno Smith has earned a big pay raise, and that's going to complicate the situation. I don't think anybody up there expected him to play as well as he did this season. So what do you do with that? Like, do you stick with him for another couple of years? Because I don't think he's gonna, he's gonna sign a multi-year deal with somebody, whether that's 2 or 3 years or something like that. I don't think that he shouldn't, he doesn't have to settle for a 1-year contract. And so what do you do if you're Seattle? Do you say thanks for this great year, let's move on and try to find somebody in the draft, or do you pony up the money and keep him here for another couple seasons?
Yeah, I like what Geno Smith did this year. I think it was for real. It would be hard for me to pay Geno Smith. And I go back to, I think it's because it's a Seattle thing. But like I remember, I think it might have been through trade that I ended up getting him and then paying. Was it Matt Flynn? You remember Matt Flynn?
Yeah.
Packers. Like Matt Flynn had those few good games with Green Bay, and then I think Seattle traded for him and paid him, if I remember right. And I'd be so cautious to paying Geno Smith. I don't know.
Yeah, I would be too. And maybe it's a 3-year deal that's really a 2-year deal, that they could get out of after that first year or whatever. But yeah, I mean, he's not a young quarterback. I know he sort of came out of nowhere, but he's been around the block, and it's really impressive what he did this year. But I would have a hard time, paying him as well. I think that's a tough. That's a really head scratching situation there with their quarterback spot.
I don't believe this is the real Ian Rappaport checking in, but I will throw this up here because I find the comment interesting. But guys, trading down twice gets you more picks, sure, but it's what you do with the picks. Poles has to prove he can build this team through the draft. I mean, yeah, that's kind of what we're getting at. Why we're talking about it, though. Like the jury is still out on Ryan Poles.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's the first year in. I mean, that's all you can really say about it. Like he's got to prove himself still, right, Sean?
You can trade all you want. You can wind up with 15 draft picks. So, if they all suck, no one's going to be happy. So yeah, we need to see more. And there were hits and misses in his first draft class. I think most Bears fans are relatively happy with Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon. Velus Jones in the third round, 71st overall. That not so much. You gotta see more out of that in 2023. And once you start getting into the lower rounds, the 5th, 6th, 7th round, I mean, that's kind of a crapshoot. I think every GM is going to have some diamonds in the rough and also some duds in that area.
Overall, with the ammo that Ryan Poles had in his first draft, I actually think he performed slightly above average. I don't think it was an incredible class by any means, but considering where they were, I actually think he did an okay job. You got to look at it in context. I think we've talked about it enough over the course of the season that I felt that there was a better way to address it than the secondary. But he did get 2 quality starters right off the top there, so I can't hold it against him too much, Sean.
Yeah, you got 2 starters there. You found a starting left tackle in the 5th round. I mean, that is another win. So, given, especially when he took over that job and Khalil Mack was on the roster, I think they had 5 draft picks. So, he turned that into like 10, 11 players and a couple of starters. I think that was a fine job. But yeah, I mean, this is the draft where we're really going to have to, you're really going to start to judge Ryan Poles with a, not like a finished product per se, but you're going to have a lot better idea of what you think of him after this draft. Obviously, it takes years on these guys to really know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we're going to jump to conclusions. We're
going to jump to conclusions anyway. Sure.
And that's what's fun about it. And sometimes I cringe because I go back and I look at some of my old takes and I'm like, man, was I dumb? But yeah, we're going to get into free agency a little more than a month from now. And then about 5 weeks after that, we get to the NFL draft. And by May 5th, May 6th, we're going to have a lot better idea of what this roster is going to look like for 2023. And I'm really looking forward to that because I do think that this is really This is a huge offseason over for the next 4 to 5 years of this franchise, Sean. And quickly before we move on, I want to make sure and get a word in for our sponsor here for the Bears Insider Podcast. Marengo Guns, always buying, always paying top dollar for your guns, ammo, and military items. Come see the experts at Marengo Guns, open 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week. And Sean, CJ had checked in here with 6 to 11 picks, referring to the trades last year in the draft by Ryan Poles. Could Poles pull off a similar move this year? Sean, do you think the Bears could stock up on picks this year?
Well, I don't think, they have 9 right now. So, if they want to bring in 11, 12, 13 guys, they don't really have to, you can do that with 1 or 2 deals. If you're talking about trading the first overall pick, you're probably going to get 3 picks for that. And so right there, yeah, you're looking at, something in that 11, 12 range. I certainly think that they can do that. And it wouldn't be as busy a day as we saw last year on day 3 when Ryan Poles traded down, like, I don't even remember what it was, 3 separate times to acquire those 11 picks. I remember walking into Hallis Hall thinking that it would be a relatively quick, easy day, and then all of a sudden they have like 8 picks. I'm like, what just happened? I'm going to be here all day, which, is that's a personal problem, not that really matters. But yeah, that certainly makes it fun. And I do think that they could wind up with quite a haul, particularly if they trade that number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, so you make a good point there. Just trading that number 1 pick does take you up to probably about 11 where they were last year. Outside of trading more than that, I'll be completely honest with you, CJ. I have not gotten far enough into my draft prep to know. Like last year was an incredibly deep draft. A lot of that had to do with the pandemic and the way things. There was a glut of players coming out essentially that made it a really deep draft. I haven't done nearly enough research to know what we're looking at in terms of those late round guys. It was worth trading back last year because of that scenario. I don't know if that's going to be the case again this year, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be some guys in those lower rounds who perform above what they were expected to. But you're right. I mean, you had the pandemic year. There were so many guys who took that 5th year in college, and things were weird there for a couple of years, and in some ways still are, but
Still are.
not as much as say last year. But that's why it's so important, I think, that Luke Getsy is down there and running the Senior Bowl this week. I mean, when you're talking about the Senior Bowl, you're talking about guys in that day 2, day 3 range. You don't get a lot of first round picks who are down there. A lot of those guys, don't participate in things like that. And so you got 4 Bears coaches down there who are getting firsthand experience with a lot of these players. That is invaluable. And we'll see what they do with that. I think the last time the Bears were coaching at the Senior Bowl, they might have taken 1 player, I think back in 2017, who they worked with there. But it wouldn't surprise me if that's different this time around, and with Luke Getsy and a couple other assistant coaches working with those guys.
We got about 15 minutes left until we got to get out of here. And I want to spend the last bit of this for everyone in the chat. If you could kind of focus your comments or questions on the offensive side of the ball. And then next week, I want to spend a little bit more time on the defensive side of the ball as we get to the end here. Because we've been going through our offseason, our 2022 season in review pieces. You can find those right now at shawlocal.com. All of the offensive positions are now up. Sean finished up with the interior offensive line yesterday. And Sean, you mentioned the Senior Bowl and that piece that I had said earlier that we have up right now with names to watch in the Senior Bowl. One name in there that stood out because he's someone that really local in terms of a guy that I've seen a lot is Chase Brown, the Illinois running back. And I bring it up not because I want to discuss Chase Brown specifically, but more when we look at the offense. I want to get your thoughts, and I want to get the thoughts of the chat. What do you think the Bears should do with David Montgomery set to hit free agency?
Well, Kyle, I think number one, you wanna talk about Chase Brown because you want to talk about my Illini and what a great season they had running behind Chase Brown. Yeah,
Hey,
I mean,
looking good.
Yeah, better than they've been. So that's good. I like where they're heading, but I think you know I do think that Ryan Poles is being honest when he says that he really likes the style of running that David Montgomery runs with, and I think that they will make an attempt to bring him back. I think the bigger question is what exactly does David Montgomery want? Does he want to stay here? Does he want to try to find a contender who will take him in a place where he can potentially be playing in the playoffs next year? Because I don't know what he wants. It's hard to get a read into him. He's a very hot and cold guy. You know, sometimes you talk to him and he's in a great mood, and other times he's giving you one word answers and you don't really know what to think. But I do think that the Bears, I don't think it's gonna be like last year we made comparisons to the Joe Mixon deal. I think it's probably less than that, given what he did this season and the raw numbers. Just looking at his statistics, I don't know that he's going to be in that same area, but he's still probably looking at 10, 11, $12 million a year at this point.
Yeah, he's not getting Joe Mixon money. Excuse me, considering the season he's coming off of here, which is a lot of that was out of his control.
Yeah,
CJ
it's
said,
probably more like a 3-year deal or something like that.
yeah,
Sorry,
CJ
go ahead.
says if David Montgomery can be reasonable, then I'd sign him. If
Mhm.
unreasonable, move on to a more dynamic back. Mike Johnson says there is a lot of running back talent in
Mhm.
this draft. Hope we get one. And this is where it gets complicated because I'm always of the opinion that unless a running back is like super high level, we're talking like generational talent,
Mhm.
don't pay him. David Montgomery is certainly not in that realm. The thing is, as you mentioned, like because of the season he's coming off of, I wonder if you're going to get him cheaper than you should.
Yeah, and because there's a fair number of really talented free agent running backs too.
Yeah.
Both of those things play into this equation.
I mean,
How
obviously, yeah.
how many teams are gonna want to spend big at the running back spot? And if you're looking at it, David Montgomery's he's certainly behind Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, and then you kind of
Tony
can
Pollard.
yeah, he's arguably behind Tony Pollard, and then you kind of put him in that next bunch there. You're looking at Montgomery, you're looking at Miles Sanders, Kareem Hunt, Damian Harris. How many teams are really going to spend that big money on a running back, and that might play into the Bears' hands.
Yeah, I mean, this is a. I think those are really good points because this is a much deeper running back class or free agent class when it comes to running backs than we're used to. And teams just aren't like more often than not. Teams are adopting the philosophy that I kind of subscribe to when it comes to paying running backs, unless you're the Dallas Cowboys and then you just throw an incredible amount of money at Zeke and butcher your team in the process. But that's what the Dallas Cowboys do, and now they can't really afford to pay Tony Pollard in the process, which man, if there was one running back the Bears were gonna like.
Oh, you love Tony Pollard.
I mean, that's the issue here. Like, I hate paying running backs, but I am absolutely infatuated with Tony Pollard. Love that kid, and just seeing like the dynamic ability he's possessed in Dallas. God, I love him, and I don't know where he's going to end up, who's going to pay him. That's the one where I feel pretty confident someone's going to be happy, and part of that because he's been behind Zeke, that the tread on the tires is going to be much more intact than you normally would see for a running back that hits free agency after that, those first 4 years.
That's a great point. He hasn't been the number one guy, and hasn't had all those carries under his belt. Now the injury sucks, and that might complicate things a little bit. But I think that's not really going to deter teams from spending money on him.
Uh, let's see. Brian checking in saying, so what is reasonable? Like 3 years, 6-7 million per year. That's low, Brian. I was just looking it up. Aaron Jones signed a 4-year deal. I'm not sure what the guaranteed money was, but it was a total of 4 years, $48 million for Aaron Jones when he re-signed with Green Bay. I don't know if David Montgomery even gets that money, Sean, but I could see a deal in the 4-year, 40 million, 4-year, $44 million range. Maybe you go all the way up to that Aaron Jones money. I think that would be a reasonable price pay.
I think you're more looking, yeah, you're looking at more like $10 million per year guarantee. You know, if it's a 3-year contract, it's probably like 30 million up to 40, something like that.
Yeah. Allen done that. Use your cap space on offensive line. Didn't Fields get sacked 50 plus times this year?
He sure did.
Cut that down to 30 plus sacks and keep Field upright for 17 games. Yeah, so I don't think it's an either or situation, Allen, there when it comes to like David Montgomery. When we're talking about a potential like $40 million contract for David Montgomery, considering how much money the Bears have, I don't think that's going to preclude them from being able to go out and sign a top tier offensive lineman. I mean, they have plenty of money. It's more if like David Montgomery gets unreasonable, I guess. Like if we're starting to talk like 4 years, 60 million, that's where you start getting into those questions more.
And look, we haven't really talked to Ryan Poles about, you know, his views on the franchise tag, but if there's one player on this roster that he's going to use it on, it's David Montgomery. That is the absolute obvious choice, because none of these other impending free agents are really worth what you would be paying them, and that's something that's in his back pocket. You know, if David Montgomery is asking for a boatload of money, he can just use that franchise tag on.
I mean, he could. And the thing there is the Bears have so much money. We're looking at a 1-year deal. That's not going to preclude them from going out and signing anyone else. Is it the best use of resources? No.
Probably not.
No, but I get what you're saying. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I get why you're saying that.
I don't think so either. I think, you know, the franchise tag often comes with a lot of, you know, baggage in terms of the relationship between the player and the team being hurt or whatever. And I don't think that that's really where they're heading. But it is an option that he has, and you know, if he's going to do it for anyone, I don't think you could name another potential free agent who the Bears would even think about using that on.
So, you know, going back to Allen's comment about using the cap space on offensive line, I think this is a good place to end it here. We'll spend about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll get out of here. Actually, now, Steve, before we go over there, Steve followed up with a question. He said, what does next year's free agent market for running backs look like? I believe, are you talking about the 2024 market, Steve? Let me know. If that's the case, I'm not going to lie. I haven't looked at all at 2024, man. If you're
I'll be honest, I haven't either.
If you're talking about 2023, that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier, and it's loaded with Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard. I think are the 3 main guys, but there's some other names out there as well. Going though to Allen's talk about the offensive line, John. My question for you is, as of right now, how many positions on the offensive line do you feel like are set?
I would say 3. I would say, you know, they're feeling pretty good about both guard spots with Tevin Jenkins and Cody Whitehair. I know people have brought up Cody Whitehair as a potential cap casualty. I don't see that. I don't really see a reason to cut a guy who's been a reliable starter when you don't really need the cap space. And then, you know, I would throw Braxton Jones into the mix, whether that's as your left tackle or your right tackle, whatever. I think Braxton Jones is going to be starting, and I do think they're going to bring in another tackle. You know, you can't go ahead with the right tackles you have right now, but you could potentially move Braxton to the right side if you find somebody who's a really good left tackle, or you know, they could go out and sign an experienced right tackle and keep Braxton at that left spot. How do you feel? I don't
know.
After saying that, you know, they got to improve the right tackle, and I don't know that they're necessarily done at center. Lucas Patrick didn't show a whole lot. they could just roll it back with him and hope that he can stay healthy. It's not really his fault that he was hurt all year. But I wouldn't be surprised if they brought somebody in at that center spot.
I think they definitely have to upgrade the center spot. Lucas Patrick, I don't know if he's gonna get cut. That was a 2-year deal. They could move on pretty
They
easily from
could
that.
cut him easily.
Yeah.
You could also draft somebody and keep, have them battle it out.
Yeah, I expect that Lucas Patrick is probably going to be here. I do think that he'll be more of a depth piece next year if he is here. Like you just can't keep cutting guys and bringing new bodies. You know what I mean? Like at some
Yeah.
point you do need some depth and you need guys that know the system, particularly if you're ready to start opening up this window somewhat next year. Yeah, but I think the reason I brought it up, Cody Whitehair, I have seen the same thing as you have about potential cap casualty, and I agree with you. Like, there's just no reason to do that. Like, they don't need the money.
Why do you need more cap space?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have
So, like,
$40 million more than anybody else.
my question is more, how much do they trust Tevin Jenkins? And it's not
Mhm.
about him staying, or it's not about him on the field, because I think we saw, and the numbers bear it out. Like, he really excelled at that right guard spot
Yeah.
once he got there. But once again, you have questions about whether he can stay on the field for an entire season or not. And I mean, at this point, we do have a large enough sample size now that has to be a consideration going into this offseason.
Yeah, there were injury issues again late in the year. And actually, kind of throughout the year, he had a hip thing going on earlier in the season, but and really all their guys at those interior spots were banged up. Cody Whitehair missed about a month with a knee injury, and we mentioned Lucas Patrick was off. He sat out a lot more than he actually played. Um, I think that's a concern. That's certainly a concern. I think that's why you gotta build depth on that offensive line, because guys are gonna get hurt. They were lucky that Braxton Jones didn't get hurt at any point this season. We talk about how he played every snap. Sometimes that's just the luck of the draw. Um, I do think that they're gonna move ahead with Tevin at that right guard spot, even with those injury concerns. I think if you go through another season and he struggles to stay on the field, at that point, you're 3 years into his rookie deal. I think maybe you can start to look at your options and potentially look to move on from that. But I do think they're going to give him another year and a whole off season at that guard spot. Remember, he didn't play that guard spot until like mid-August. A whole off season there is going to really help him.
Yeah, I mean, I fully expect that he's going to be the starting right guard week 1 of next year. It's more about just how do you protect yourself,
Hmm.
and that's where this is a good spot to wrap it up, Sean. And we got plenty of time. We're talking about offense for the majority of this show, and it was kind of nice because we didn't really mention Justin Fields, and we got plenty of time to talk about quarterback moving forward into the offseason here. It's Tareen Whitfield checking in here with hit the like button. Really appreciate that. Yeah. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. Really appreciate it. Anytime anyone does that, it helps people find the show. It helps, the old YouTube algorithm help pop us up there a little bit, help people find us. So appreciate Torian, you checking in, man. When we talk about the Bears, though, Sean, overall in this offseason, it's so funny and so kind of strange because it's it's really obvious, I feel like, what the Bears need to do, but it's and they've set themselves up, I guess. Ryan Poles has set himself up, but like it's really a fine line to walk right now because they need probably 2 to 3 impact players that can really alter the way a game flow. You know what I mean? So they need to do that while at the same time greatly improving their depth, because you looked at going into the season, how many undrafted free agents were on this roster, on that 53
Hmm.
man roster? It was an incredible amount. They have to improve their depth overall. And so it's how do you do both of those things in one off season? That's a really tough thing to do. It can be done. It certainly can be done, but it can also go sideways really easily.
Yeah, it is really hard to do. And maybe, that's an argument for kind of what we were talking about earlier, where, if they do trade down in this draft and wind up with a boatload of picks, probably half those guys are gonna pan out and be potential players for you, whether that's a starter, whether that's a quality backup. That's one way to do that. But yeah, I think this is why Ryan Poles looks at this as a multi-year thing. He's not trying to solve all these problems in one off season, because I think he realizes that you can't. And to build the type of depth that gets you, the Eagles' defensive line that's playing in the Super Bowl here in a week, that takes a couple of years. You can't do that all in one off season. They can certainly improve and get a lot better than they were last season, and I think that should be the goal. But yeah, when you're looking, it's got to be a long term lens when you're looking at trying to build this team into a winner.
Howie Roseman, man, you bring up the Eagles there. Two Super Bowl teams in 5 years now,
Yeah.
different quarterbacks, rebuilding it both times. That is a franchise. The Eagles have become a franchise here over the last decade or so, where it's a model that the Bears can look at. The Eagles are consistently finding ways, and that's what the NFL is. It's most teams aren't the Patriots. They're not going to be in the playoffs for however many straight years, right? Things
Mhm.
are going to go in cycles. The thing is, when you hit those down cycles, it's being able to keep those down periods short, and the Eagles are doing that now. That's where you want to see this Bears franchise get to, Sean.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of people point to what they did with AJ Brown, and it's just funny because that was the big criticism for Howie Roseman. 2 3 years ago was how all these receivers were not good enough. They were dealing with the Jalen Reagors and other guys that they drafted and missed on, and I think they missed on Justin Jefferson by one spot and took somebody else ahead of him. And it's just, you got to give your GM time, and certainly the Bears are going to do that with Ryan Poles. But yeah, this is there's no one off season fix, especially when you're coming off a 3-win season. They're going to have to take chances on guys, and some of them aren't going to pan out, and that might make you start looking towards your next options, which if you're the Eagles, lands you with a guy like AJ Brown a couple of years later. So I think Eagles fans are pretty happy with how that all worked out.
We're gonna have a good Super Bowl, Sean. We'll talk about that next week as we get ready. At that point, we'll only be a couple days away from the Super Bowl. It's gonna be a good one. But we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. We got a lot to talk about here over the course of the off season. We want to thank everyone who joined us live this morning. We'll let you know probably next Friday morning. We'll stick with Friday mornings here for the next few weeks at least. Sean, anything else that we didn't hit on before we get out of here, man?
No, no. I'm glad to be back with you, Kyle, and thank you to all you guys who are listening and commenting. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, make sure you stick to shawlocal.com. We'll have content for you there throughout the offseason. A lot coming on. We got all of our defensive previews, or I'm sorry, not previews, our 2022 defensive reviews before we start kind of getting into some draft talk. Some combine here is now where you're at the end of the month. We will be at the NFL combine. So a lot to get to over the next month or so. Thank you once again for joining us this morning. For Sean Hammond, I am Kyle Nabors. Everyone enjoy the weekend. It's going to be weird without any football this weekend. We'll get through it together and then get into the Super Bowl next week. For now, we're signing off. Talk to you guys next week.